over in Vancouver, BC, where we saw a mass stabbing take place. And again, details are still a little hazy. We just know people were hurt, injured, and the perpetrator is also not living anymore. And that is kind of the situation that has happened. And people have been taking to social media, mainly on X, saying, this wasn't the norm 9 years ago. What is happening to our country? But from your perspective, Jasmin, how did we get here? It's an obvious question. I know most people have the answer, but from your perspective, from what you've known and what you've been hearing, what has allowed for this to take place?
Well, I mean, the obvious ones, catch and release, shocker, doesn't really work. Vancouver as a whole is just, wow, what a woke city that is, where there is very little consequence for anything. It's so bizarre. I used to have a friend who lived in Vancouver for quite some time until she married a man in Seattle, and now they no longer are in Canada. But I remember going there in 2013, 2014, something like that. And the city was so unbelievably different than it is today. And you have, a perfect storm that's created possibly on purpose, possibly not. You have mass immigration affecting the entire country, unbelievable amounts of poverty. You also have safe supply, because that makes sense. And then also these insane catch and release policies. I mean, in what world do any of those things promote a healthy, safe society? Every single one of those would be on the ticker of something's going to go wrong, something's going to go wrong. And they just keep checking off more of the wrong list versus actually doing something good. And I think to me, really, the biggest problem in all of this is just the fact that compassion has gone way too far. And there have been so many ideologies and so many laws passed under the guise of compassion. But when you look into it, there's nothing at all compassionate about having criminals be released from prison, sometimes, multiple times in the same day. There's nothing compassionate about not having enough funding for your services. There's nothing compassionate about defund the police, which is some rhetoric that we've seen going on throughout the country for years now. And then on top of all of that, you also have a mass amount of people that nobody knows about. Nobody knows where they are, where they came from, who they are. You've encouraged your society and everybody to wear masks and hide their identity 24/7 nowadays whenever they're doing something terrible. And I think with this, it's just the perfect storm. There's something actually, I wish I could remember the actual data on this, but something on the Joe Rogan podcast that he's talked about frequently is the amount of people where even when they're introduced to something as simple as marijuana, there's a certain percentage of the population that's actually higher than you would think. It's like 1 in 10 or something, who that alone, just this being introduced to that particular narcotic or I don't know, medicine, whatever people call it these days, can actually alter your brain so much so that you can start developing schizophrenia from as much as one toke. And, if you factor in some of those things and how your brain chemistry changes depending on what you're exposed to, and having the safe supply, safe injection, all of that stuff, which thrives in Vancouver, and we have seen such a huge downfall of the repercussions of that. Imagine how many people are out there that really do just have a lot of untreated diagnoses, and also a lot of anger and frustration because they are stuck living this life that they don't want to, and 25 years ago wouldn't have had to. But if anything, it's like now all of a sudden this lifestyle is something that the elites who run the world pat themselves on the back for. Like, oh, hey, good job, us. We made somebody totally impoverished and addicted to something and it's all our fault. Hey, we did so good, everybody. It really is just a ripple effect. And I think we're going to see a lot of other things like this going forward as well. There's no way that you won't. There's stories like this happening in every city across the country lately, and there is absolutely a common denominator for why.
Absolutely. And there's, there's something to the whole safe supply argument that we've heard. And the issue is we're not even going to go down that path. But, there's areas where, depending on how it's applied, it can work. The issue is there was no plan to this. It was throw them in a vending machine, throw them in the community, and hope for the best. And
well,
yeah, go on.
Sorry.
Yeah,
I
you
was just going to say it's interesting, because Canada, we used half the model. Portugal would be a prime example. They introduced this, I think it was in the late 90s, if I'm not mistaken.
correct.
And the first 10 years or so of the model was not greatly a success by any means. I was in Portugal a couple months ago, and let me tell you, that is one beautiful country with the cleanest streets ever. And that model, while it did take some time to implement and actually work effectively, it's this really crazy thing where, yes, absolutely, safe supply. There are many drugs that you can be on where if you were to quit cold turkey, you would die without a doubt. And there's a lot of people who are addicted to very strong drugs like that. And so to have safe supply in a setting where you also are offering people rehabilitation, that's what Portugal did. And, we're decriminalizing drugs, but if you're caught with them, you have to go to rehab now. Whereas Canada, it's like, here, we're decriminalizing XYZ in Vancouver only, even though people are begging us to get rid of that. And if you get caught with it, you're not going to get in trouble. Actually, maybe our officers are just going to walk around with a little, hey, buddy, do you want a pipe? You just finished breaking into this store. No problem, though. Our jail's overrun anyway. Like, just go back out. Like, and that's why I say it's like compassion has just been totally lost. And for the people who argue it, absolutely, I understand the point of, oh, well, you can't just quit cold turkey. No, duh. Of course you can't. But also, like, in what way is the rehabilitation that Canada offers a pamphlet inside of a safe consumption site that people grab to wipe their bottoms with on their way out? And it's a pamphlet for a rehab that costs minimum $20,000 a month. Like, what a joke, really.
Yeah. And kind of going in that compassionate aspect too, where there's a handful of liberal policies that they've introduced over their 9 years. So again, in that name of compassion, yet there is such a lack of compassion because such little thought was put into a lot of these policies, which shows you that you didn't actually care. You just wanted to be able to point and say, we're the good guys. Here we are. And so I'm curious, like, I almost find that people vote in these directions to a fault. When I go back to the provincial election in BC, where, the NDP won by a hair, but they still won. And after you're seeing everything in your streets and seeing everything that's going on, you keep voting for these guys. What do you think it is about BC residents that was like, yeah, we want to keep this party going?
I mean, I think the propaganda has certainly worked a lot in terms of the Conservative Party. I think too, I'm not from the area, but I think a lot of their voter base, it's a very high immigration area. A lot of their voter base are people who came here under Liberal and NDP backed policies. So why on earth would you want to go and vote in the Conservatives when it was this other group that allowed you into the country to begin with? So I think that certainly has a lot to do with it. And worse than that, to be frank, I think for lack of better words, the woke mind virus is so real. And there's a lot of people that I think are so permanently damaged from that. And it is just this chaotic virtue signaling, this chaotic narcissism where it's like, oh, we're going to support all of these things that are terrible because if I acknowledge that they're terrible, even though deep down and inherently I know that they are, but if I acknowledge it, well, then I'm a bad guy. But if I support it, then I'm a good person and I can show everybody that I'm a good person. Like, it's just this really disgusting narcissism, I think, that's been so unbelievably encouraged in the West as a whole, really, for the last, gosh, I want to say at least decade, but it started long before that as well. But the last decade, we have really been seeing just the virtue signaling nonsense where there is something so clearly in your face. It's something I say all the time. Like, there's so many people where you could slap them in the face with the truth and they still wouldn't feel it because they're so brainwashed, for lack of better words again. Yeah.
For sure. And I'm going to push back a little bit. I think there's definitely truth to what you were saying about the mass immigration that was taking place and then typically voting in that direction of the NDP Liberals. Again, vote for the party who brought you here. My grandfather was the same way. He came over on a boat from Italy, told his family the rest of his life, you vote Liberal the rest of your life. That's what he did. That was kind of, that's how it kind of goes. But I remember having a guest on here just a couple weeks ago. His name is Kushal. He runs the Karvaka podcast. He is Indian and lives out of Ontario half the year, lives in Mumbai the other half. And we were talking about the BC election, and he's like, I'll tell you the truth, Josh. The brown people are voting conservatives. It's those damn white people that keep voting the NDP. I don't get it.
I believe that.
You know, and I was like,
that.
and there's like some truth to that where there's like, yeah, like they come from a place that has conservative values. They want to see conservative values in their new home. And it's just these white people that are constantly feeling guilted out. They think the orange is the good. And if they don't vote for the orange, then I guess they're voting against their rights to have an abortion. You know, these are the conversations, the thoughts that go through a lot of these people's minds. Anything that you want to kind of add on to that before we move on?
I mean, I think really that just kind of, and that's something that I've certainly experienced as well. You know, Canada is absolutely an incredibly diverse nation. Every single one of us has friends that are not from here or, you know, our second, third generation, whatever it is. But to me, again, that just really signals that the propaganda has really worked. We have absolutely created a society. The third wave feminism movement certainly didn't help here either, where, you know, white people, we hate ourselves because we're white. And how do we virtue signal and feel as though we have done some sort of good? Oh, well, it's by voting for this party that's advocating for this thing that makes me somehow feel virtuous now, when in reality I don't. And it's really just because you've been so mass programmed into like resenting your existence, really.